That'll work.
What'd you touch?
Well,
Nothing that I could tell.
all that's ours. Good to see you, man. Hey, thank you for talking. You are totally. It's just a logistic thing of, well, yeah, that too. Or hot. I don't know what you want.
I figured you'd prefer that I talk to you than not.
See you, man.
It's so cool that when I put a guitar on, people they get quiet, like they think it's going to be really good. But, what'd you pay to get in here, seriously? Good afternoon. I am Pastor Jeff Goodman from Mount Olivet, and on behalf of Pastor Sarah Keeling, are we raising hands or standing? And Pastor Stephanie Beckhor here at Mount Olivet, we are so glad you're joining us this afternoon for this event. We're Methodists, so we're going to start with some worship. So let's bow our heads, and I'm going to share a prayer from the Methodist Church of the United Kingdom. God of all goodness, grace, and love, transform us by your Holy Spirit. May we value the uniqueness of all people, each made in your image. Help us as we try to live in a justice-seeking way. Help us treat other people with dignity in our encounters, conversations, and relationships. Help us to stand in solidarity with those different from ourselves so that we may work together well. Help us learn as we listen. May we as Christians show your kindness of heart in our life together. May we all take courage as we are transformed into a community of justice. May we reflect the Spirit of Christ in our love for all your people. Give us your goodness, grace, and love, we pray. Amen. Our scripture today is Colossians 2, verses 2 and 3 from the Message. I want you woven into a tapestry of love, in touch with everything there is to know of God. Then you will have minds confident and at rest, focused on Christ, God's great mystery. All the richest treasures of wisdom and knowledge are embedded in that mystery and nowhere else. And we've been shown the mystery. So my friends, my friend and my lovely wife, who's also my friend, let's just be really clear on that. Megan and Pam are going to sing a song for you by Lauren Daigle, a very simple song called Hold On to Me. In the middle of this song, in a couple of sections, Megan's going to recite a poem. The poem's entitled Colossians 2:2. It was written by a member of our congregation, a young woman of great faith. She had been hurt repeatedly by the church because of her sexuality and was looking for a safe space to worship, a church that would accept her and lovingly welcome her into the family of God. Inclusivity is not merely a concept, but an expression of the love of Christ, a love for all of us. It is so important at Mount Olivet that we are a reconciling congregation. This led people like this young poet to our family. So I am looking forward to the next month. We're usually downstairs, by the way. They don't let us up in the sanctuary very often, so this is very weird for us. It's very bright, don't you think?
When the best of me is barely breathing, when I'm not somebody I believe in, hold on to me. When I miss the light, the night is stolen. When I'm slamming all the doors you've opened, hold on to me. Hold on to me. Hold on to me when it's too dark to see you. When I am sure I have reached the end. Hold on to me when I forget I need I would like to know you more, but in a different way than I did before. Because I used to think a lot of things, but now I know that I don't really know anything. When I don't feel like I'm worth defending, when I'm tired of all my pretending, hold on to me. When I start to break in desperation, underneath the weight of expectation, hold on to me. Hold on to me. Hold on to me when it's too dark to see you. When I am sure I have reached the end. Hold on to me when I forget I need you. When I let go, hold me again. I've fallen back in love with the mystery of who you are. No longer tearing myself apart over how to be. I just am simply yours. I could rest here in your arms forever, 'cause I know nobody loves me better. Hold on to me. Hold on to me.
Amen.
Hello. It is great to be back at Mount Olivet. I recognize several familiar places, some from here a few years ago, some from a Virginia annual conference a few years ago, and some from the years that Lindy and I spent at Foundry. So it is great to be here with all of you. Thank you for putting this together. I texted Mark and Rob and said, we want to have a meeting. I'm going to be in D.C. and we want to meet with Virginia Reconciling Methodists. So I am super happy to be here. I know there are people online too. What I'm here to do really is to share some of what RMN has been doing the last couple of years to hopefully answer your questions about the General Conference. Some of the questions that I've gotten when I've done this have been in that space of, I don't have a crystal ball, but I will attempt to answer your questions about General Conference. I want to start by talking about some of the work that RMN has been doing the last several years. If I can find my notes. There we go. So some of you realize that we updated our foundational statements a couple of years ago, or a year ago, I guess. And we did that after a period of pretty intense work on the part of the staff and the board that lasted about, I shouldn't say lasted about 2.5 years because the work is still going on. But we needed to be very bold and public in our commitment to intersectional justice. And our previous mission and vision statement just didn't explicitly use the words. So we updated our foundational statements, and we've been doing some work through the Love Your Neighbor Coalition, where RMN is partnered with Methodist Federation for Social Action, all of the ethnic caucuses, and several other caucuses around the church. We've been doing work with that group since 2008, 2012, somewhere in there. It depends on who you ask as to whether you get the answer 2008 or 2012. And that work has contributed to it, and it has grown. So we're at a point, like I said, where we have updated the foundational statements to provide that emphasis. I want to share our mission statement with you, and then I want to read something that our new board chair, the Reverend David Meredith, some of you know David, that he shared with the Black Methodists for Church Renewal at their annual meeting in Cincinnati earlier this month. So first, let me read to you the mission statement. Reconciling Ministries Network is committed to intersectional justice across and beyond the United Methodist Church. The across and beyond words are important. Across and beyond the United Methodist connection. Working for the full participation of all LGBTQ plus people throughout the life and leadership of the church. It took us, I will tell you, longer to finalize those words than any activity like this I've ever been involved in. So we're in the period where we're sitting with them, and we think they reflect where we need to be right now, but there could be some tweaks coming. Now I'm just going to read the words, and then I'll close this computer and we'll talk about what's happening. So this is, again, words that David wrote from his heart. David is a retired clergy in the West Ohio Annual Conference who has been a part of Affirmation, the Reconciling Congregations Program, and Reconciling Ministries Network for decades. He was one of the people there near the beginning. So let me read these words because they were impactful to me when I heard them. And you will be seeing these, I think, frequently. Let me begin with a confession on behalf of RMN and our predecessor organizations. I and we humbly acknowledge the white privilege and white supremacist attitudes, individuals, and actions that RMN has carried and perpetuated. RMN is not untouched by racism and its residuals in the movement, and from this we turn away. Anew and afresh, RMN accepts our collective baptismal promises. We accept the freedom and power God gives us to resist evil, injustice, and oppression in whatever forms they present themselves. That's why RMN is here. The impact of racial injustice and inequity in the United Methodist Church and in the world calls us into solidarity and partnership with others. We are called and committed to following the leads of persons of color, going where they go on streets and in boardrooms, and walking with them in resistance and liberation. So I'm very excited and pleased that RMN is at a point where we're going to start publicly saying these things, where we're going to start talking about the work that we've been doing. And I hope that as time passes, the questions about, okay, well, what have you done? Because that's the first question that everyone has will become fewer and further between because it will be obvious what we're doing. We're not there yet. Like I said, we'll never be done with this work. It will continue, but our commitment to it is real. So I'm going to pause for just a minute now, let those words kind of sink in, and close the computer up here. So I want to talk about the things that you see in this book. And you don't have to go page by page through the book, because I'm not going to do that. We were talking to people about the future of RMN and where we were headed, and got feedback from reconciling congregations and from individuals who've been a part of the movement that we were not doing a very good job of casting a vision for beyond the 2024 General Conference. The focus of our work for the last year plus 2 years, something, has been 2024, and we weren't doing a good job of casting that vision. Now, we'd had lots of conversation about it amongst ourselves, and we were actually doing a lot of work to prepare for it amongst ourselves, but no one else knew what that was. So the booklet that you got as you came in, and for those of you online, I will leave some at Mount Olivet, and if you will email me, I will make sure you get a mailed copy. If you are going to General Conference, you will get one at General Conference. So this really kind of addresses a little glimpse of 40 years of history. I guess I should start by saying that 2024 is our 40th anniversary. We were launched from affirmation 40 years ago as the Reconciling Congregations program. That's a little unusual in the world of small nonprofits. Not a lot of them live and last 40 years, and we think our work is just beginning. Or we know our work is just beginning. I shouldn't say we think it's just beginning. So I know that I want to share about RMN, and I want to talk about General Conference. And you know, sometimes it's easier to talk about all of that together than apart, even though RMN is not tied to the General Conference. We're an independent 501c3. We're not an official part of the United Methodist Church. I get that question occasionally from people that I really think everybody knows that, but apparently there are a lot of people who think we're an official part of the church, funded by the United Methodist Church, and not quite there yet in terms of LGBTQ justice. But we've been trying to figure out, like I said, how to cast this vision. So let me just talk about some aspects of it. So first of all, to cast the vision, you have to understand where we came from. So 40 years is a great time to start talking about that. And it's been even longer than that since Incompatible with Christian Teaching was added as an amendment to a friendly piece of legislation at General Conference in the closing hours of the General Conference in Atlanta in 1972. So shortly after that, the gay members of the United Methodist Church, who were surprised by what had happened, formed a group called the United Methodist Gay Caucus. It was the predecessor to Affirmation. I think there may have actually been a third name in the middle there sometime. It was the predecessor, though, to Affirmation and to our roots, our own roots. And in 1976, 4 years later, is the first time that LGBTQ people, in those days, it was mostly lesbians and gay men and a few bisexual people. We didn't have this broad spectrum. We didn't understand that back in the 70s. So they showed up at the 1976 General Conference, passing out flyers, inviting people to come and hear what they were about and hear why what was done in 1972 was harmful. And they've been back at every General Conference since 1976. So that's why we're still doing this work. It's why our roots are important. You need to understand that this is LGBTQ justice in the United Methodist Church is not new. We are far from the first organizers in the church, and we are not nearly as skilled at some of the other groups who've been doing organizing for centuries. But we will be there in Charlotte for our, I don't know, I can't count that many general conferences. This will be my 4th one, which is kind of hard to imagine. Anyway, so we tie our history to where we're going. And some of where we're going is into a future that we believe is broader than the United Methodist Church. Remember the new expressions of Methodism that was the language back in 2019 and 2020 because we were going to have these new expressions of Methodism. One of them is launched. We already do work with Methodist denominations, the Methodist Church in Brazil. We've done work with some AME churches and some CME churches in the United States. So across and beyond the United Methodist Church is already real to us. And it speaks to the fact that we're not tied to the United Methodist General Conference, which was a point that we've tried to make really clear for the last 3 years. Because when we were going through the period of 2019 General Conference, or 2016 General Conference through the Commission on the Way Forward, to the 2019 called session, to the 2020, 2021, 2022 General Conference, it seemed like all of our work was about General Conference, and it's really only a portion of what we do. The RMN board met in Charlotte a few weeks ago, and one of the things that we talked about was our response to things that might happen in Charlotte. So I'm going to kind of, before I go into what RMN is doing in the future, I'm going to talk about General Conference, which is, I think, most of what people here want to hear about. So in Charlotte, there's going to be a broad coalition of the willing that is sort of leading the legislative presence and the legislative process for accomplishing what we want to accomplish. There are 3 pieces to that. One is removal of the harmful language. It's near and dear to our hearts. It's what we've been working on for a very long time. We believe we have a decent chance of that actually happening this time. The second thing that's a part of Plan A, we call all of these things together Plan A. There are 3 pieces of legislation. Second piece is passing the revised social principles. And oh, by the way, if you pass the revised social principles, then you remove incompatible with Christian teaching because that's where it appears, which is huge all by itself. That's what started everything else. The justification for all of the other language, all of the discrimination against marriage and ordination and all of the chargeable offenses was pointed at that social principle. So if we had never done that, we would have never had the other language, I believe. So that's the second thing we want to do. That change would also change the definition of marriage to between a man and a woman to between 2 people. The third thing, and the thing that is the most important institutionally, if you look at the big United Methodist Church, is what's called worldwide regionalization. And that is a series of legislation that brings equity across the regions of the world, if you will. All of the places where United Methodism is will follow a similar structure. They'll have similar governance authority. They'll have similar abilities to create their own ministries, to create their own processes for ordination, etc. So that legislation is not new. This is, I don't know how many different times the General Conference has had regionalization legislation. This is the first time, and actually in my experience in the United Methodist Church, it's the only time legislation has come from outside the United States. The legislation that the delegates will be considering came initially from Philippines and Africa. So while it is heavily supported by the United States, and a lot of United Methodists in the jurisdictions and annual and conferences here, it came from central conferences. It is the legislation that they need to feel like they're as much a part of the United Methodist Church as the church in the U.S. We have been working for 2 years, I think, on very intentional relationship building across the continent of Africa. And when I say we, I mean the people working on this general conference and on moving the church forward in a more just and equitable direction. We've been working on this with groups in Africa. The most recent one is the United Methodist Africa Forum. And these groups that are convening, the first thing they're doing is not talking about the legislation. The first thing they're doing is building relationships with each other. Building relationships across the connection with people who care about and want to be a part of the United Methodist Church going forward. It is paying off in all kinds of dividends. People have each other's phone numbers. There's WhatsApp groups going on. We're becoming more of a worldwide church through this process of building relationships. And isn't that amazing? Isn't that what we're about? We're learning. It took us a long time to figure out that, we don't have to always talk about legislation. We can talk about mission. We can talk about ministry and what it looks like in different contexts. One of the other things that's pretty clear if you are working with the group that's working on this is that everyone that's engaged believes in the worldwide United Methodist Church. Everyone is committed to remaining a church that is unique in its partnerships and pieces and groups that are outside the U.S. As a mainline denomination, we're different from everyone else in that aspect of who we are. So I guess before I get off the subject of regionalization, the thing that makes that, while it's where we need to go, it's the best step institutionally as far as moving forward in the direction that meets the values of congregations like this and others in Northern Virginia, is that legislation. One of the 8 petitions, because it's across, there's 8 petitions that make it up. One of the 8 has to be ratified. It needs a 2/3 vote at General Conference, and then a 2/3 ratification in the annual conferences. Probably in 2025, although maybe in 2024. It all depends on how quickly the General Secretary gets the information to the bishops after the close of General Conference. But that is a heavy lift. Ratification means that every annual conference, so this is where our work comes in. So in the Virginia Annual Conference, whether it's the 2024 Annual Conference or the 2025 Annual Conference, your job is to get all of the lay delegates into the room when it's being talked about, all of the clergy delegates, all of your retired clergy. Everyone who has a vote at your annual conference needs to be in the room when the ratification vote happens. And they need to vote yes. It's a unique process. I've never quite run into anything like it, but what happens is your vote in the Virginia Annual Conference gets added to ours in Baltimore, Washington, gets added to the one in North Georgia, gets added to the one in North Katanga, gets added to the one in Burundi. So all of those votes get added together, for regionalization to become the next move forward in the United States, or in the United Methodist Church, that total has to be 2/3 in favor of it. It's really hard to do. We're a really diverse church. So I'm going to pause, breathe, and ask if there's questions from people in the room or even online. I don't know if somebody's watching online and can tell if there's questions from the folks that are watching online or not. But are there questions about General Conference, about our presence in General Conference, or about the work that we need to do to get there that I can answer? You know, I heard when I got here, yes. Did anybody bring a crystal ball? So I believe there's a good chance regionalization will pass. And I believe that because of the work of listening and talking to each other and building relationships that's happened. So at previous general conferences, we depended a lot on what bishops from outside the U.S. would tell us about their delegations and their perspectives of their delegations and that kind of thing. With this annual conference, we've built those relationships ourselves. So while we're still in conversation with bishops from outside the U.S., we have a lot more confidence that the relationships we've built will help, because we believe that everyone understands the importance of passing this legislation to the future of the institutional church. So it's hard to answer, do I think it will pass, but I believe it has a good chance. Other questions? Thank you. Other questions? Now I might change my answer. Other questions folks have? So let me, while you're thinking about it, and please, I'm here to try and answer questions, so don't be shy if you have them. But let me kind of talk about what's going on around the edges at General Conference. So we all know that delegates go and that there's this legislative thing that happens, and they're on this thing called the floor behind the bar, right? That's General Conference language for where the delegates are and when they're doing their work. But there's a lot of work that goes on around the General Conference. There's witness that's planned by different groups that are supporting different pieces of legislation. There are parties that happen, there's prayer meetings that happen, there's all kinds of things that happen around the edges. I mentioned the Love Your Neighbor Coalition a little earlier. The Love Your Neighbor Coalition is central to that work. We have a database, and I'm going to get the numbers wrong, Mitty can correct me. We have a database where people can sign up, and when I spoke at Foundry this morning, I asked them all to please sign up if they were going to be in Charlotte and were not a delegate and might be willing to take on some volunteer roles while they're there. But we have probably close to 100 volunteers that will be doing things like passing out information to people when they come in the morning, offering hospitality in a suite that we have at a hotel that's across the street from the convention center, providing pastoral care is a big objective of the Love Your Neighbor Coalition. We're working with several partners in that, Resist Harm, and the Young Prophets Collective, if anyone remembers J.J. Warren from the floor of the 2019 General Conference. J.J. is an ordained elder now and is actually living outside the country in school, going to school, but he runs an organization called the Young Prophets Collective that provides an alternative worship service for young people. It's an international group. It's pretty cool. He's going to help us with that, or his team is going to help us with that. JJ's a delegate, again, so we will hear from him. So anyway, so we will be there. Lots of things going on. If you were at Convo, you're familiar with First United Methodist Church in Charlotte. They're partnering with the Love Your Neighbor Coalition and are hosting a lot of events throughout the week. And though this won't be advertised until the time, if we're successful with removing the language, at some point during the week, shortly after the vote, we'll have a celebration that evening at First United Methodist Church. We are not, so this is a change from some of what has been experienced at general conferences in the past. We're not planning any protests or any celebration on the floor of the general conference when these actions happen. There may be singing, but we're not planning to disrupt the proceedings or try to take over the bar or anything else. Those are actions that happened at previous general conferences for good reasons. But as part of building relationships and part of being in healthy relationships with people from across the globe, we've come to understand that what is normal for us, because it's what people in the U.S. do, is sometimes offensive to people from other cultures, and we want to be respectful of that. So anything that happens, any witness that happens as a result of actions on the floor of General Conference that are related to the group that we're working with will happen outside the convention center on the sidewalks. That's celebratory or lament, and we think that's what we need to do for the future, for the church going forward. So that's a little bit of a change. I can't tell you that, that something that will surprise me won't happen, but we're not planning anything. Yes? Oh, yes. So 2 things that I neglected to mention this morning. See, Betty was not there this morning when I spoke at Foundry, so I neglected to mention these things. So the other things that the Love Your Neighbor Coalition is providing are, and this is from one of the groups organized by Richard Bentley. Many of you know Reverend Bentley, who has been working with global relationships forever. If he heard me say that we had just worked with people from other continents for this general conference, he'd probably take me out back and explain that I didn't really understand. He's been working on this for years. The Global Relationships team is working with to bring an international marketplace to Charlotte. So when you get there, if you're going to be there in person, you can find out where that is. It will be in one of the hotels across the street from the convention center. He's also, we're also doing an event. Mitty, tell me when the event is on the 21st. That's an international event. Yeah, and April 22nd is Earth Day. So lots of things happening, and First Methodist Church is going to be where a lot of them happen. So to find out the details of what's happening in any witness or any party or any celebration or any gathering of any of the partner groups of the Love Your Neighbor Coalition, it will be on the Love Your Neighbor Coalition website, and we'll keep it updated throughout the week. So, before I move from the topic of General Conference, any final General Conference questions? Somebody told me when I got here that Virginia was ready, so maybe you are. So I want to talk a little bit, well, actually, I should say one other thing about General Conference. For this group, so you'll understand, so that you can thank people that you know of that are working with the Love Your Neighbor Coalition, with RMN, with MFSA. General Conference is not free. All of this work and all of the money to support it is donated money. Our last roll-up, and this changes on a daily basis as expenses come in and out, but our last roll-up of the total investment in this year's General Conference, counting the staff time of RMN and MFSA employees, is right around $400,000. So let that sink in for a minute. It's not all, RMN is not funding all of it. RMN funds the staff, our staff part, and our presence, because RMN has a large presence there. We have 5 or 6 staff members there. We have 4 or 5 board members there. And we do have a couple of events that we're responsible for. So that's what our part of the on-the-ground money is for. Our on-the-ground budget is right at $100,000, maybe $120,000. The Love Your Neighbor Coalition budget is $135,000. So it's, like I said, it's not cheap, it's not free, but it is necessary. And I just want to leave you with that so that you understand the devotion of the people that are doing this work. It is mostly volunteers. Yeah, Rob?
Just want to say, I'm Rob Vaughn, and want to say a word of gratitude to help put a point on what Jan has said. There are Mark Elder, who's part of our Marks on Church and Society Legislative Committee with me, but also Corinne and Allison, and Caesar is waiting to figure out where he's at. But our legislative committees have been meeting monthly, and some twice a month ever since summer. Some has been meeting since 2020, and they're facilitated by folks from RMN. And they're working with anybody who's sort of centrist, progressive, part of the Coalition of the Willing, and we wouldn't be able to do the preparation, and there's 1,500 pages or so, and they're preparatory materials, to be ready for engaging if it hadn't been for the facilitation of folks with RMN. So their work has been central to helping folks come as prepared as possible, not only for the 3 legislative priorities that we've heard, but just to develop relationships so that the work can be done well. And so just from one individual delegate and my colleagues from Virginia and the Congo who are here, thank you for doing that. It's made a world of difference. And it's like any church job. You may pay for 40 hours, but you get 167 because that's all the hours are in a week.
Thanks, Rob. I appreciate that. And I will pass those words on to the staff, who will certainly appreciate that, particularly the organizing team, who are meeting internationally with people. So I wake up at 3 in the morning and notice that I've gotten 4 texts since 9 o'clock the night before from staff members that are still in meetings. So it happens, it accelerates during a general conference time, but it's the work we do. And the people on the RMN staff, and I think that this holds true for all the volunteers that are part of the Love Your Neighbor Coalition, and for the folks that are parts of the ethnic caucuses that get some funding for the church. It's a labor of love, and we all love what we're doing. And we're all very hopeful that as we move forward this time, that we'll accomplish some of the objectives that I just said that we had. You know, and I said this earlier and nobody really believed me, but I think the piece of legislation that has the best chance of passing this time is removal of the language, which is really a kind of a unique, and I never thought I would get to say those words kind of thing. So we've talked about General Conference. Now let me talk about what RMN's been doing and where we're headed. And I'll try to make this kind of short and give you, I'll be here afterwards. I can answer questions. I'll take questions from the group of you here or anybody online as well. So I mentioned that, you know, people were telling us we hadn't cast a vision, and we realized they were right. The booklet that you have in front of you is the result of that. We hope we've taken the first steps towards casting a vision. The problem or the concern that I had when we printed these was that by the time they arrived at my house, they would be out of date. And that almost happened, or it's almost happened in a couple of cases. But RMN made the decision during the pandemic to kind of break the tie between us and the General Conference so that people didn't think that our next steps as an organization were tied to the actions of the General Conference delegates. So we did that initially, and then we started talking to new congregations and new people that were engaging with us. And I have to tell you that the best thing that happened to RMN as an organization was the outcome of the 2019 General Conference. Our website crashed 20 minutes after the vote because so many people were trying to get information about RMN that had never thought about us before. We've had 10,000 new RUMs since then, and I don't know how many new reconciling congregations and communities since then. It was dynamic and happened instantly, and we had no idea how to deal with the growth or anything else. It was a good problem to have as the result of something that was horrible. So we started asking questions of the newest people who had connected with us. And what we learned is that while people like the Reverend David Meredith, who I mentioned earlier, who've been connected to RMN since the beginning, knew who we were, what we had done, all of the challenges we'd been through, knew how to find the resources they needed, etc. The newer folks didn't have any of that background. They had no idea that RMN was almost 40 years old. They had no idea that there were groups that preceded Reconciling Ministries Network. They didn't know we were a 501c3. They didn't know what kinds of work we did. So we've been on a quest through a series of things called virtual porches to kind of answer some of that. And we've had virtual porches on topics across the board. We've had bishops come talk. We've had authors come talk. We've had theologians and members of the academy come and speak. And we'll continue to do that. That is going to be a part of who we are. Incidentally, it's David Meredith who gave us the name for the virtual porch because he told us back in 2019 that he had kind of always considered RMN the front porch of the movement where people gathered. So we just made it virtual. So that's where the name came from. The other thing that we started doing is investing in resources. There are toolkits that were the first thing we did. We did a lot of toolkits for youth and children and for ministers in different situations. The Parents Reconciling group jumped on board and started doing their own resources for parents Then, as a result of lots and lots of you all need to do this pushes from people like yourselves, we decided that we were going to go into the online training business. We built Theology, Identity, and Me. It's a 3-part video training series, online training series, that addresses the theology behind the language of sexual orientation and gender identity. That was our first foray. Thank you. I knew I would do that, by the way, before I was through here. That was our first foray into kind of development of resources that were not something that we went into a conference room and came out with a PowerPoint presentation a few hours later, right? We actually invested in it. Then we had many, many pastors who said, you know, there aren't any good progressive children's curriculum materials out there. So maybe that's what you should do next. So we sat around the staff meeting one day and said, we have no idea how to do that. But you know what? There are a lot of people connected to progressive Christianity who know exactly how to do that, and so we hired them. And we put together our first ever vacation Bible school. It's called Just Like Me. I don't know which churches in Northern Virginia have purchased it. I meant to look that up today, but I didn't get that far. But we have sold several churches in the DMV, or several copies in the DMV. We have passed 100 copies. And we never thought we would sell 100 copies our first year. I mean, not only did we not know how to build one, we had no idea how to market it or how to distribute it. We knew we could sell it to the base. So we knew that we had 900 and something reconciling churches that, 15% of them would buy it. Eventually, right? We had no idea we would sell 100 copies plus. I mean, now we're hoping we had 150 copies in our first year. So that's been fun. We hope to take that and turn it into a Sunday school curriculum, the same subject matter, because a lot of churches don't do Vacation Bible School anymore. And while we built it to be flexible, we get from folks that do children's education that, it would really help us if you would do this and we didn't have to figure it out ourselves. So we're going to try to do that. We're starting our second Vacation Bible School this summer, yes. It will not be ready for publication next summer. It will be the summer of 2026. We made that decision because of General Conference. We only had so much bandwidth, and General Conference was more important, so we will see the next Vacation Bible School for the summer of 2026, but it will come out a lot earlier in the year. So those of you who make your decisions in late summer, what you're going to use the following summer, will have it by that time in 2025. So that's kind of where we've chosen to invest. You'll see us do more investment in resources. That seems to be the biggest need as we talk to congregations that are connected to us now, as we talk to individuals from around the movement. So that investment will continue. The other things, though, that are going to change, they're already changing, is we have a ministry that is evolving with churches and individuals that were impacted by disaffiliation. And these are not always reconciling churches. They're just churches that had RUMs in them. So they knew about RMN and know the kinds of support that RMN offers, so they've reached out. So we have a growing ministry with those congregations and individuals. Right now, it's more of a situational-based ministry. We don't have a program. We have a response team when someone reaches out. We are working with organizations like Fresh Expressions and with Lighthouse congregations and some of those different things that are popping up around the connection because we decided that we didn't need to reinvent the wheel, that we could leverage what the church was already doing and what annual conferences were doing in different places. So where our inclusion is welcome, we've been doing that. So that's a new thing for us. You'll see us doing lots of events. We did one convocation. It was great being in person again. It's great being here. It's just amazing to actually not be talking to people over Zoom. We did an event a convocation in Charlotte, and I hear that there's going to be a convocation in the summer of 2025, perhaps in Madison, Wisconsin. We're not sure about that, but sometime in July of 2025, we hope to announce the place and dates at General Conference, but there's a lot of work that has to be done before that happens, so I'm not 100% certain we'll get that. Anyway, so that's kind of where we're headed. The other thing that I can tell you is we've made the decision that we're going to grow. The other groups like RMN and other denominations, when they got to the point where the United Methodist Church is today, where it seemed like the language was changing, and it seemed like people in the church were working better together, they shrunk. And I think I mentioned at the beginning that we really think our work starts when the language comes out. I mean, there are congregations, and you're in the Virginia Annual Conference, you know these congregations. There are congregations that have no idea how to be in ministry with and to LGBTQ people. And they didn't have to talk about it or think about it because they could point to the discipline and say, we're not allowed to spend money on that, even though they really are, because the funding ban doesn't impact the local church, but that's another story. But there are those congregations all over the country. And so that will be a major part of our work. We will be going back to the bases of grassroots organizing, making sure that our annual conference teams are strong. The one in Virginia is, so you may not see us or hear from us unless you invite us specifically or somebody's coming through town. The ones in a lot of other annual conferences only exist when RMN comes to town. And so those are the ones that we're going to go address first, because those are usually in the places that will need the most support. That's where our service is needed. So that's where we think we'll be headed after that. Anyway, lots of stuff is happening. I could talk forever about the things that we're doing, and I know you don't want to stay here forever. I want to put in one more plug for finances. I mentioned that RMN is going to grow. RMN is a $1 million a year organization. We've been $1 million a year for a long time. 900,000, $1.1 million, $1 million, $1.3 million. That's the budget level forever. The 2024 budget is $1.5 million. So we're going to grow. We're taking a leap of faith that we can raise the money because our revenue has not been $1.5 million. But that's where to provide what the United Methodist Church needs to really move in a more just and equitable direction. We need people that are engaged in that ministry who are willing to do it. And so we're kind of walking into that space. We believe it's ours. We've been there for 40 years trying to do it. We're within and beyond the United Methodist Church now. So we're going to take all the liberties that those words give us. I will also tell you that I work with a team of executive directors, faith-based LGBTQ justice leaders. And they are anxiously watching our resource page on our website because they use the resources we build. So we're happy to be able to provide that. The United Methodist Church is the largest mainline denomination in the United States. So it's not surprising that Reconciling Ministries Network is the largest faith-based LGBTQ justice organization in the U.S. So we want to own that and the responsibility that comes with that. To do that, we have to grow our programming to include more resources, and we have to go find more money. So we can do both. I'm standing here telling you I believe we can do both. I believe that between the Love Your Neighbor Coalition, RMN, and MFSA, we're going to raise the $400,000 that we made in an investment in General Conference. And I believe that RMN will increase its revenue. Whether or not we get all the way to $1.5 million this year, I don't know, but we could. So I want to leave you with what can you do? And I first want to talk about General Conference. The first thing that I will tell every United Methodist they should do in support of General Conference is call your delegates. Call them, thank them, tell them you're praying for them. As they head to Charlotte, tell them that you will pray for them as they return, no matter what happens at the General Conference. You will be very glad that they provided the service that they provided. This delegation was elected in 2018, is that right? 2019 for the 2020 General Conference. So they have been serving for a long time. And it's been a up and down. Gear up because we're going to have a General Conference. Oh no, we're really not having it. Gear up because we're going to do it virtually. Oh no, we can't do that. Gear up because we're going to have a General Conference. So we owe them, and one of the ways that we can show them how much we love and care for the work that they're doing is to let them know that we're praying for them. Send them a note. Send them a thank you for your service, and I'm praying for you at General Conference. If you're going to be in Charlotte as a volunteer, find them and hand them a note in the hallway. I can't emphasize that enough. I want to go back to the word relational. That's who we are and what we're about. There are lots of other things that you can do in your local area to support the work of the General Conference. Send your delegation off in style. Organize prayer meetings. Organize listening services. It's always, so I have been the person who's been sitting watching my computer screen to see what was happening on the delegation floor. It's much more fun if you're doing it with pizza and friends than it is because even though this is the process the United Methodist Church uses for governance and making decisions, it's not the most exciting show in town. But I encourage you to plug into part of it and listen to it because it really gives you an impression of how our church works. And may encourage you to get engaged and be a part of the next delegation. Questions or comments from those here? Yes, Mark. So I will tell you that Reconciling Ministries Network has never said no to anyone who is called with a need, to any minister or any parent who is called with a need. I took a call from a parent not too long ago who wanted to know how to fix her son who had just told her he was gay. So we get those calls a lot. I will also tell you that even though Keith Boyette and I would not have agreed on the color of the paint on the wall in the conference room where the protocol team met, if you'd asked us, he knows that he can call me if he needs something, and he will do that. And I believe that's the initial work with the Global Methodist Church, when they call and need something, when a congregation calls or a pastor calls or a parent calls. That's the initial work. We know that we have reconciling communities in churches that disaffiliated. So we don't have that whole full picture yet, because that's kind of hard to put together. There's no automatic way of doing it. So we have a connection that's in those congregations already. Whether or not that connection is allowed to stay and be present in the church remains to be seen, because they have their transitional book of discipline will expire, I think, in September, and they'll put a new one in place. So we don't know what that really is going to look like, or what the process is for changing it. I guess it doesn't expire. It'll probably be amended. So yes, but I don't know what it looks like. But the important part is we will never say no, right? And we will try to keep those conversations not political. Yes? Thank you. So for those people who are online, if you couldn't hear it, there's a gentleman that made a comment about we have to remember that we're talking about General Conference votes, and I'm paraphrasing, so we're talking about General Conference votes, but we also need to be aware of our responsibility as citizens to vote in upcoming elections. So I want to also add one other thing as a comment to what you just said, or a response to what you just said. I mentioned intersectionality at the beginning. So RMN works, and this is another part of the work that you don't see because it's not a major part of what we do, but we have connections in equality organizations in different states across the country. And we show up as people of faith when they need us to show up for something. We're a 501c3, so we can't engage in lobbying, but we can certainly show up and stand in a crowd. So those are the kinds of things that we do. We always encourage people to vote, to run for office, etc. But like I said, we're a 501c3, so we can only do so much in the secular kinds of politics, but we show up where we can. Other questions or comments? Yes.
After the 2019 General Conference, many of us who were there got on airplanes feeling as though the hope had got sucked out of us. Not very hopeful for where the church was going or what was going to happen. You've laid out kind of the nuts and bolts of what you think is going to happen and how you're going to get there, but I'm curious what you are hopeful for going forward and where you're seeing hope at work right now in the Methodist Church.
So I see hope right now in the Methodist Church and the coalition of people that's working together. I think it's safe to say, Rob and Mark can tell me if they agree, Mitty can tell me if she agrees, it's a group of people that in 2019 would not all have been at the same table. It is a group of people who want to remain in the United Methodist Church. That's one of the things that's different about it. There's not any conversation about people that are working there that are thinking about going other places. So that gives me hope. It gives me hope when a group of people from the United Methodist Church in the U.S. go to a UM Africa Forum meeting as listeners and listen. That gives me hope. It gives me hope to meet people from central conferences when I go and do talks in different places, because a lot of times if you sit in a pew in a United Methodist Church on Sunday morning, you get kind of this us and them kind of feeling when we're talking about the worldwide network. And it's not us and them. We're all part of the United Methodist Church. So that gives me hope. That I go a lot of places today where I meet people that are Central Conference delegates, that are working with Africa Forum, that are working with the Love Your Neighbor Coalition. It gives me hope to see groups like this turn out for conversation. When we first started meeting with people again after the pandemic in person, the groups were small. The in-person groups were maybe 5 or 6 people, and then it might be a hybrid meeting, so there would be another handful of people online. This turnout, the turnout at Foundry this morning, is very encouraging. The turnout at Be Warm yesterday is very encouraging. People are reconnecting, because one of the things that happened during the pandemic is we all disconnected. And so people are reconnecting. They're just kind of sticking their toe in the water again. And that's very encouraging to see. So there's a lot that gives me hope. What I think will happen, I'm the eternal optimist. I believe we're going to remove the language. I believe we're going to pass the revised social principles. And I believe we're going to pass regionalization. I don't think any of those things are going to be easy. And I am very well aware that it only takes one little thing to derail that. But I believe that the delegates this time are well educated and know how to respond to those things, like the change in 1972 that led us down this path. So I think that will help the bishops go through their own training so that they're equipped in how to control the body, if you will. Control is a bad word, but to do their leadership during the different parts when they're the bishop that's in charge for whatever is being presented. So all of those things are hopeful. So it was good to see you, Betty. Yes, www.lyncoalition.org. Sign up to volunteer. How many of you are going to General Conference? Okay. How many of you are delegates that just raised your hand? So a lot of people are going that are not delegates. That's great. There is a lot going on around the edges. Please connect to that. If you need more copies of the booklet, I will leave what I brought, but if you need more copies at any of your congregations, email me or call me and I will ship them to you. I have 5,000 or something sitting in my garage, so I'm happy to get rid of a few more. It's not out of date yet. It might be by the time it gets to you in the mail, but it's not out of date yet. Other questions or comments before we kind of wrap this up? I want to say thank you. It's great being here again. I love this church. I was here with Mark when you were taking your vote a few years ago. So it's great being back. I'm very glad that you're among the Reconciling family. I hope that if you start looking at the booklet and you have questions, or if you know, by the way, on the chart in there about 1.5 million, it says that we need 101 donor at a level of $125,000. If you know that donor, feel free to call me. But I'm grateful to be here. I appreciate your making the time and space available. So, thank you all. You're welcome. How does this turn off? Okay.
my rule and ask you something. Because you brought it up first. I think we should probably have a band have let people know. It's looking at time sooner and sooner.
It's a base. It's an upright. They call it a stick, a base stick. It acts the same. You just have a bow on it. Except you don't have that big body. You can transport it around without having to spend money. Yes.
Like, going back to it's actually, I was, it's like a, I have a relative who's the church split. There's a number of people who protest a pretty sizable, and the church was like already not. So my mom was like supportive of saying, but there's a lot of people who are not.
Megan, here, would you leave all that crap here? I don't. No one cares.
Right.
Yeah.
Just leave it all.
Oh, and this here.
I like this. Electric upright base.
You don't have that big clunky body to try to put around.
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty cool. Ooh, page slip butterfly. Page slip butterfly. That's what that's called. That's what that product is called. I have one on my living room floor.
Oh.
Just to the left of the pedal line. So I have 5 pedals now instead of 3. Is it easy to see that text that you read? The poem? The poem?
Is it easy to see it?
Yeah. So like a place I can go to.
Oh, yeah. I have it in text.
That's what I meant. That's what I meant.
The
Is it
one
easy
that-
to see it with
within the song?
nearsightedness?
The one that's within the song?
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, I have it in a text. That's a gift. I can text it to you.
You can,
Yeah. Why don't she do it?
you can span your fingers like that.
She probably just text it to me, so I don't have to stand here
But
reading it.
probably has it without the song. Do you want the song with it? Embedded in the song or just the poem by itself?
I mean, it'd be nice to have the song too. This one, good song. This is song. Good. Do you have my number?
Oh, she knows it.
You're still under Megan now.
I have to change my name. That's
And
accurate.
I go with what's official.
That's official.
You better get global entry before you change your name. Like
It's just so much work.
TSA pre-check, global entry. Do all that, then change your name because it'll take a lot less time. Do you have passport renewal due? You should do that
I
first.
use my passport with my old name. I think I just booked my travel.
I think you,
Megan